The sun had barely risen over the sprawling plains when Jace, a rugged cowboy with a weathered hat and a dust-covered coat, guided his weary horse along a narrow trail. His boots left shallow impressions in the dry earth, and the horizon stretched, endlessly, painted with streaks of gold and amber. Jace had spent years wandering these lands, chasing lost cattle and keeping small homesteads supplied. Life was hard, solitary, and unforgiving, but he had grown accustomed to it. On this particular morning, however, he sensed something unusual, an unsettling silence, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. As he rode closer, to an abandoned cabin, partially hidden by overgrown weeds and broken timbers, Jace noticed movement, a faint shadow flickering near the doorway. His instincts, honed by years of survival, told him that this was no ordinary encounter. He slowed his horse and cautiously approached, calling out gently to avoid startling whoever or whatever was hiding inside. The shadow shifted, and Jace caught sight of a small figure crouched in the corner. The child was frail, with dirt-streaked cheeks and hollow eyes that reflected a mix of fear and despair. Their clothes were tattered rags, barely protecting them from the chill of the morning. The smell of hunger and neglect lingered in the air. Jace's heart tightened. Despite the harshness of the world he had grown accustomed to, he could not ignore the obvious suffering before him. For a moment he simply observed, assessing the child's condition. They were weak, trembling, and clearly in desperate need of nourishment and care. Jace dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small bundle of provisions, stale bread, dried meat, and a canteen of water. Kneeling at a safe distance, he spoke softly. "Hey there, little one. I don't mean you any harm. Here, have a bite." The child flinched at his voice, eyes wide with caution. But the desperation for sustenance overcame their fear. Slowly they crawled forward, taking the offered food with trembling hands. As the child ate, Jace gently examined them for injuries. Bruises and scratches marred their small body, signs of neglect and hardship. There were no obvious signs of disease, but the malnourishment was severe. Jace's mind raced with questions. Where were the parents? How long had the child been alone? Yet he knew that pondering these questions could wait. The priority was immediate care. He led the child to his barn, a small structure with weathered wood but a sturdy roof, offering shelter from the elements. Inside, he laid down a clean blanket and encouraged the child to rest. Over the next few hours, Jace tended to the child with careful hands. He gave them water to sip, fed them slowly, and whispered reassurances, creating a sense of safety that the child had likely not felt in days. He spoke of simple things, the beauty of the plains, the rhythm of horse hooves, and the promise of warmth. Though the child remained silent at first, the soft persistence of Jace's kindness began to chip away at their fear. The days that followed the child's rescue were quiet, but filled with small, meaningful routines. Jace, the lone cowboy who had spent years wandering the vast plains, found himself settling into a rhythm that was unfamiliar yet deeply satisfying. Each morning began with the sun spilling golden light over the horizon, illuminating the rough wood of the barn and the soft blanket where the child now slept. Jace would rise before dawn, preparing a simple breakfast of porridge or bread and water, always making sure the child had something to eat before tending to his horses and chores. At first, the child's movements were hesitant, tentative. Every sound or sudden motion made them flinch. Fear still lingered in their eyes, a shadow from the days they had spent alone and hungry. But slowly, trust began to take root. Jace spoke gently, sharing the simplest truths about the world. "The horses are friendly, as long as you treat them well," he explained one morning, guiding the child's hands along the mane of a gentle mare. "And the plains, they can be cruel, but they can also be kind if you know where to look." The child listened, wide-eyed, absorbing not just the words but the calm, steady presence of the cowboy. Meals were shared, stories were told, and even the quiet moments, sitting together as the wind rustled through the tall grass, became an unspoken lesson in patience and security. Jace also introduced the child to small practical skills, knowing that independence was as vital as safety. He showed them how to identify edible plants, pointing out wild berries and herbs hidden among the brush. He taught them to tie knots and secure a saddle properly, to recognize animal tracks, and to navigate by the sun and the stars. Each lesson was interspersed with humor and encouragement, a stark contrast to the harshness the child had endured before. Slowly, the child began to respond, not just with obedience, but with curiosity, asking questions, experimenting, and even laughing for the first time in what felt like forever. Their bond deepened through these shared moments, creating a foundation of trust that neither had expected so quickly. The child began to relax in Jace's presence, confiding small memories of their past and fears for the future. Jace listened without judgment, offering comfort and wisdom drawn from his own lonely years. He understood, better than most, that life on the plains was a series of challenges and that sometimes survival required more than skill. It required a heart capable of compassion. Evenings were the most precious time. After the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, Jace and the child would sit outside the barn. The child would rest their head on the cowboy's shoulder as he strummed a soft tune on his worn guitar, a lullaby of hope and calm. The harsh winds and lonely nights that had once defined their lives felt softened, almost as if the plains themselves were responding to the warmth of their companionship. As the days turned into a week, Jace and the child settled into their quiet routine, but the events at the barn were far from unnoticed. Travelers, traders, and wandering cowhands passing through the plains began to catch whispers of a cowboy who had found a starving child and taken them in. Some stories were accurate, speaking of the kindness and care Jace had shown, while others grew taller with each retelling, adding heroic flourishes that Jace himself would have chuckled at if he had heard them. The cowboy who tamed not just wild horses but also a lost soul, one traveler proclaimed. Another wagged his head, saying, "He's the only one with a heart big enough to save a child from the desert itself." The rumors traveled fast along the trails, carried on the backs of weary riders and through the dusty stalls of frontier towns. Merchants shared the tale over evening fires, embellishing it with dramatic gestures. The child reportedly found at the edge of a cliff, rescued from starvation by sheer luck and courage. Jace, busy with chores and caring for the child, remained unaware of how widely his actions were being discussed. He noticed only the occasional stranger glancing curiously at his barn or offering him a nod of respect in passing. Despite the exaggerations, there was a deeper truth that spread quietly among those who truly understood life on the plains. Acts of genuine kindness were rare, and when they happened, they were remembered. In a land where survival often demanded self-interest, the fact that Jace had gone out of his way to nurture a defenseless child set him apart. Many who heard the story felt a stirring of admiration, while others felt a pang of guilt for their own indifference to suffering. Slowly, the story began to create ripples in the local community, a subtle reminder of humanity in a harsh environment. Word even reached nearby settlements that had little contact with the frontier cowboy. By the time a wandering preacher stopped to check on Jace, he had already heard multiple versions of the story, each one highlighting the cowboy's bravery, compassion, and quiet resolve. "You've done something remarkable, son," the preacher said, placing a hand on Jace's shoulder. "Not everyone would take the time, not in a world this unforgiving. The Lord will surely honor your heart." Jace merely tipped his hat, uncomfortable with praise, but quietly moved by the acknowledgement. Amid this growing awareness, the child began to notice subtle changes too. People passing by would smile, offer small gifts, or pause to say words of encouragement. The child's own sense of self-worth seemed to grow with these affirmations, reinforcing the lessons of trust and care that Jace had already been teaching. For the first time, both the cowboy and the child felt the beginnings of a larger world, one where actions, however small, could inspire others beyond the immediate circle of their lives. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, a solitary figure appeared on the trail leading to Jace's barn. The man rode a horse with a calm yet purposeful gait, his presence immediately commanding attention without a hint of aggression. Unlike the usual travelers or wandering cowhands, there was something almost regal about him, an air of authority, tempered with wisdom. His attire was distinctive, finely woven garments with subtle patterns that spoke of a culture far removed from the scattered settlements Jace knew. The child, playing near the barn's entrance, froze upon seeing the rider. Approach. Their small frame trembled with curiosity and caution. Jace, sensing no immediate threat but remaining vigilant, stepped forward, hands slightly raised in a gesture of peace. "Evening," he called. "You're welcome here. Can I help you?" The rider dismounted gracefully, tying his horse to a nearby post. "My name is Dakota," he said, his voice deep but kind. "I come on behalf of my people. The child you have taken in is one of ours." Jace felt a flicker of surprise and concern ripple through him. He had assumed the child was alone by circumstance, not realizing they were part of a larger community. "One of yours?" he echoed. The child looked up at Jace, eyes wide, as if both relieved and anxious. Dakota continued, explaining that the child's tribe had been distant for years, living in isolation to protect their traditions and way of life. Circumstances had forced the child to wander near the plains, where survival had become a desperate struggle. "We have long observed acts of kindness among outsiders," Dakota said, his tone reverent, "and your compassion has not gone unnoticed. My people believe that deeds like yours honor not just the individual, but the spirit of humanity itself." Jace, humble by nature, felt a surge of unease mixed with pride. He had done what he felt was right, never expecting recognition. Yet here stood a representative of an entire tribe expressing gratitude. He glanced at the child, whose tiny hands clutched the blanket around them. Though still wary, the child's eyes shone with curiosity and hope, sensing the weight of the moment. Dakota spent the evening sharing stories of his tribe's values and customs, explaining how acts of generosity were traditionally acknowledged. He spoke of a code that guided their people: honor, respect, and gratitude toward those who displayed selflessness. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will meet others who wish to express their thanks directly. We come not with judgment or demand, but with recognition of your heart." That night, as Dakota prepared to leave, Jace reflected on the unexpected turn of events. The plains, which had always seemed vast and indifferent, suddenly felt connected to something much larger. He realized that the child's survival was intertwined not only with his own actions, but also with a network of lives, traditions, and values that extended far beyond his solitary existence. For the first time, Jace understood that a single act of compassion could resonate far beyond its immediate impact. The seed of kindness he had sown had drawn the attention of a community rooted in honor, and soon he would witness a response that was as extraordinary as it was humbling. The morning after Dakota's visit, Jace awoke to a quiet barn bathed in soft golden light. The child was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the blanket, their eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. The previous evening's revelation that they belonged to a distant tribe that held acts of kindness in the highest regard lingered in both their minds. Jace, accustomed to solitude and the simple rhythm of the plains, now faced the unusual challenge of preparing for something far beyond his ordinary experience, a formal visit from an entire community coming to honor him. Jace's first instinct was caution. He knew little about formal gatherings, especially one involving hundreds of warriors. What if their arrival brought expectations or complications he could not foresee? He spent the morning tending to the barn and surrounding grounds, repairing any loose boards and clearing away debris to ensure the place was orderly. Every sweeping motion of the broom, every hammer strike on a loose plank, became a silent preparation, not for himself, but for the honor and respect he wanted to convey. The child helped where they could, picking up small tools and observing, Jace with admiration. Despite the practical preparations, Jace also reflected inwardly. He thought about the acts that had brought him here, not a single heroic gesture, but countless small choices guided by compassion and conscience. He realized that the recognition he was about to receive was not merely about the act itself, but about the principle behind it: empathy, courage, and selflessness. This understanding tempered his anxiety and gave him a quiet confidence that, whatever form the visit took, he would respond with humility and honesty. Word had already reached some nearby settlers, who had begun watching from a distance. Jace noticed the occasional traveler slowing their pace to catch a glimpse of the barn. Whispers floated across the air. "The cowboy who saved the child? They say the tribe is coming to thank him." Jace paid little mind to the rumors, focusing instead on the child's comfort and the preparations within the barn. He arranged fresh blankets, set out a few simple but clean dishes, and made sure there was adequate water for both himself and the child. As the afternoon sun climbed high, Dakota returned briefly to reassure Jace. "All will be well," he said. "Our people come with respect and gratitude, not expectation. Your heart will speak for itself." His calm demeanor and assured tone eased some of Jace's lingering unease. The child clung to the words like a lifeline, their excitement bubbling over as they imagined the approaching visitors. Evening came with a quiet tension. Jace watched the horizon, half expecting a small contingent, half fearing the scale of what might arrive. He reviewed the lessons he had taught the child, the skills of patience, respect, and humility, realizing they were as relevant now as ever. The plains, usually so empty and predictable, now felt alive with anticipation, the wind carrying whispers of a gathering that promised to be unlike anything Jace had ever experienced. At the break of dawn, the plains seemed to hold its breath. A thin layer of mist clung to the ground, softening the golden light of the rising sun. Jace stood outside the barn, the child beside him, both staring toward the horizon, where a distant dust cloud began to shimmer. Slowly the cloud grew larger, and the rhythmic sound of hooves striking the earth reached their ears, a deep, resonant cadence that made the heart skip a beat. From that haze emerged hundreds of riders moving in perfect unison. 200 warriors, each adorned with traditional garb, painted faces, and symbols of their tribe, rode with a sense of purpose and dignity that took Jace's breath away. Their presence was commanding, yet there was no aggression in their formation, only respect and intent. Horses snorted softly, their hooves kicking up small clouds of dust as the warriors approached the barn where the act of compassion had begun. The child clutched Jace's hand tightly, eyes wide with awe and recognition. Many of the warriors had familiar features that reminded them of the child, and the child waved shyly, a bridge between their distant tribe and the cowboy who had saved them. Jace felt a mix of emotions, humility, awe, and disbelief. He had expected perhaps a few representatives, maybe a single messenger, but not an entire contingent of warriors riding across the plains to honor him. As the riders dismounted, they, arranged themselves in orderly rows, their expressions solemn but warm. Dakota, the elder who had visited before, stepped forward to address Jace. "We have come to honor your courage and compassion," he said, his voice carrying across the silent expanse. "Your actions saved one of our own, and in doing so, you have shown a heart worthy of respect. Our tribe brings not only gratitude but also friendship, that it may endure for generations." The warriors approached, offering gifts with careful reverence, hand-carved tools, intricately woven blankets, and symbolic ornaments representing their culture and gratitude. Jace accepted them with quiet humility, feeling the weight of each gesture. Every gift was more than an object. It was a sign of connection, of acknowledgement from a community whose values he had only begun to understand. The child ran forward to greet some of the warriors, embraced by distant relatives and friends they had never known. Laughter, greetings, and the hum of conversation filled the air. Jace watched, realizing that his small act of kindness had bridged two worlds: his solitary life on the plains and the rich, vibrant traditions of the tribe. The sheer scale of the tribute humbled him, reminding him that the simplest gestures, born of genuine care, could ripple far beyond one's imagination. As the morning progressed, the warriors shared stories, songs, and rituals with Jace and the child. Each moment reinforced the bond forming between the cowboy and the tribe. Horses nuzzled together, children played, and elders spoke of the enduring importance of empathy and honor. Jace, who had spent so many years navigating the loneliness of the plains, realized that he was witnessing something extraordinary: the living embodiment of gratitude, respect, and human connection. Once the initial greetings and formalities settled, the warriors gathered around the barn in a loose circle, their presence both commanding and gentle. The air was filled with anticipation, the mingling scents of horses, leather, and the open plains creating an almost sacred atmosphere. Jace and the child sat quietly among them, absorbing the hum of conversation, laughter, and the occasional melodic chant that echoed across the morning light. It was a world so different from the solitary plains Jace had always known, yet it felt welcoming, even intimate, in its warmth and authenticity. The elder Dakota began to share the stories of their ancestors, recounting generations of trials, triumphs, and the values that guided the tribe: honor, courage, empathy, and respect for life in all its forms. Jace listened intently, realizing that these stories were more than history. They were living lessons, passed down not just to preserve memory, but to instill a sense of responsibility and connection among each new generation. The child nestled close to him, occasionally interjected with questions or shy observations, bridging the gap between their two worlds. As the stories unfolded, the warriors demonstrated aspects of their culture: intricate dances that mimicked the movements of the animals they revered, songs that conveyed emotion through rhythm and voice, and rituals that honored the land and the spirits believed to inhabit it. Jace watched in fascination, noting how each act was imbued with meaning, how every motion and word reflected centuries of tradition and careful thought. The child's eyes shone with awe, sometimes glancing at Jace as if to say, "This is my world too, and now you're part of it." The cowboy, in turn, shared his own stories, albeit simpler ones. He spoke of the endless plains, the solitude of long rides under the blazing sun, and the lessons learned from survival in harsh conditions. Though his experiences lacked the ceremonial elegance of the tribe's traditions, they were genuine and heartfelt, reflecting a life shaped by resilience, responsibility, and quiet courage. The warriors listened with respect, their eyes reflecting curiosity and understanding, and through this exchange, a mutual admiration grew. As the day progressed, bonds deepened. The child interacted with the warriors, learning songs, games, and small skills unique to their tribe. Jace observed, realizing that the child now occupied a dual space, part of his life on the plains, part of the tribe's living legacy. This blending of worlds, facilitated by compassion and trust, created a rare harmony. Mealtimes brought further connection. Simple fare was shared communally, hands passing dishes and drinks, laughter mingling with stories. Jace marveled at how easily strangers could transform into a community through shared experience, respect, and openness. The child's laughter rang through the barnyard, a sound that symbolized not just recovery from past suffering, but the joy of belonging. In the etched, days that followed the warrior's visit, the bond between Jace, the child, and the tribe deepened in ways that were subtle but profound. The initial awe of the ceremonial arrival had transformed into a steady, enduring connection rooted in trust, respect, and shared experiences. The child now moved fluidly between two worlds, the open plains with Jace, where independence, resourcefulness, and quiet reflection were paramount, and the tribe, where traditions, rituals, and collective wisdom shaped daily life. Each environment offered lessons that complemented the other, and through it, the child grew stronger, wiser, and more confident. Jace and the tribe worked to maintain regular communication. Couriers traveled between the homestead and the tribal village, bringing messages, small gifts, and supplies. Sometimes Jace rode alongside the child to meet members of the tribe in the open plains, sharing stories, helping with tasks, or learning small customs and skills. These exchanges were more than formalities. They became opportunities for mutual teaching. Jace learned the meaning behind songs, symbols, and traditions, while the tribe gained insight into the practical knowledge of life on the plains, tracking, survival, and the rhythm of the land. The child thrived at the center of this growing community. Under Jace's guidance, they mastered horsemanship, navigation, and self-reliance, while from the tribe they absorbed lessons of history, heritage, and spiritual respect. In essence, the child became a living bridge, carrying the values and experiences of two worlds. Their laughter, once hesitant and cautious, now rang freely across the plains, a symbol of resilience, love, and belonging. Jace himself felt a transformation. Though he had always been self-sufficient and solitary, the connection to the tribe introduced a sense of community he had not anticipated. He realized that compassion, when nurtured, has a way of forming relationships that endure beyond the immediate act. The friendship he had cultivated with the child extended naturally to the tribe as a whole. Visits were no longer ceremonial obligations. They became moments of shared joy, mutual respect, and meaningful companionship. The tribe, in turn, embraced Jace not just as a benefactor but as a trusted ally. They invited him to participate in seasonal rituals and celebrations, teaching him songs and dances, and sharing stories of their ancestors' courage and wisdom. In doing so, Jace came to understand that his small act of kindness had created ripples far beyond the barn where it had begun. It was no longer about recognition or reward. It was about the enduring connections that kindness could forge. Together, the trio, Jace, the child, and the tribe, embodied the harmony of two worlds, demonstrating that understanding, empathy, and mutual respect could transcend distance, culture, and circumstance. In the evenings, by the fire or under the open sky, stories and laughter flowed freely. The plains and the tribal village, though physically separate, were now linked in spirit, a living testament to friendship and humanity. Through these sustained bonds, Jace realized that life's most profound treasures are not material but relational. The child's growth, the tribe's trust, and the enduring friendships formed became proof that even a single act of compassion could ripple outward, shaping lives, communities, and hearts for years to come. The plains, once a place of solitude, had become a home for connection, understanding, and enduring friendship. News of the extraordinary gathering of warriors and the acts of kindness that had inspired it did not remain confined to Jace's barn or the plains surrounding it. Word traveled swiftly through nearby settlements, trading posts, and neighboring homesteads. Travelers who had witnessed the warriors' arrival spread the tale, recounting the sight of 200 riders honoring a lone cowboy who had saved a starving child. People whispered about the cowboy's humility, the child's recovery, and the rare sight of a cultural exchange so genuine and heartfelt. The community's response was a mix of astonishment, admiration, and self-reflection. Those who had previously turned a blind eye to suffering in their own neighborhoods began to consider the impact of small acts of compassion. Mothers and fathers, shopkeepers and ranchers found themselves asking, could they have done the same? Could they have paused even for a moment to help someone in need without expecting anything in return? Jace's actions, simple yet profound, became a mirror, reflecting both the best and the most neglected qualities of the human spirit. Children who had grown up in these settlements were particularly inspired. They listened wide-eyed to stories of the cowboy, the child, and the visiting warriors, seeing in these events the possibility of courage and kindness. They began to play games that reenacted the rescue, or rode their horses across the plains, imagining themselves helping those in need. In many ways, Jace's single act of compassion had become a catalyst for teaching the next generation about empathy, moral courage, and the value of helping others. Even adults, hardened by the harsh realities of frontier life, felt a stirring of humility. Conversations in trading posts and around campfires shifted. Where there had been gossip, there was now discussion of morality, community responsibility, and the unseen consequences of human actions. Farmers shared extra food with neighbors, ranchers helped each other without expectation, and local leaders began to organize small acts of assistance for those struggling quietly in the outskirts of the settlements. Jace's example had shown them that recognition was not the point. The impact of one's deeds was far greater than personal reward. For Jace himself, these reflections were quietly humbling. He did not seek accolades, yet he observed with quiet satisfaction that his actions were inspiring change. The child, who had once been alone and desperate, now became a symbol of resilience and the power of care. Together, they embodied the truth that even small acts of kindness could ripple outward, touching lives in ways impossible to predict. Years passed, and the plains where Jace had once roamed alone had become a living testament to the power of kindness. The barn where he had first sheltered the starving child remained, its weathered walls now carefully maintained as a symbol of hope and compassion. Travelers who passed through would pause to admire it, sharing tales of the cowboy whose quiet act of mercy had set in motion a chain of events that touched lives far beyond his own. The story had become legend, not because of grandeur or wealth, but because of its simple, enduring humanity. The child, now grown into a strong, confident young adult, moved seamlessly between two worlds. With Jace, they had learned resilience, survival, and independence. From their tribe, they had inherited tradition, wisdom, and a profound sense of belonging. They had become a bridge between cultures, embodying the lessons of empathy, honor, and courage. Their presence was a living reminder of what could grow from a single act of compassion. Jace himself had aged gracefully, his life enriched by the relationships he had formed. The initial humility he had felt when confronted by the tribe's gratitude had evolved into quiet pride, not of ego, but of knowing he had made a difference. He continued to care for travelers, neighbors, and animals alike, guided always by the principle that kindness, even in small measures, had lasting impact. The bonds he had built with the tribe endured, with regular visits, shared stories, and mutual support. Cultural exchanges became routine, fostering understanding, friendship, and unity across the plains and beyond. The neighboring communities, inspired by Jace's example, had slowly shifted as well, Families shared resources more freely. Young people learned to value empathy alongside strength, and communities began to take small but meaningful steps to aid those in need. The ripple effects of Jace's choice, the act of stopping to care for a single child, had created waves of human connection and social responsibility that extended across generations. Even the plains themselves seemed changed. Where once the Ide wind carried only dust and silence, it now carried stories of compassion, courage, and the enduring spirit of humanity. The barn, the child, and the cowboy became symbols of hope, showing that a single act of mercy could touch hearts, build bridges, and create bonds that time and distance could not sever. In the quiet moments, when the sun sank low and the sky glowed with the soft hues of evening, Jace would watch the grown child interact with members of the tribe, teaching younger generations, laughing freely, and passing on the lessons learned from their shared past. The legacy of compassion was alive, tangible, and thriving, proof that even small deeds, done with sincerity, could shape the world in ways no one could predict. The story concluded not with a dramatic flourish, but with the quiet, enduring resonance of kindness. The plains, once a place of solitude, had become a tapestry of lives intertwined through empathy, trust, and generosity. Jace's simple decision to care for a starving child had sparked a movement of human connection, leaving a legacy that would endure long after his own journey ended. A reminder that true heroism lies not in fame or fortune, but in the willingness to act with compassion no matter the cost.